Begeistert. Was hast du gesagt?
Ich habe eigentlich hauptsächlich erzählt, was der Hausausschuss überhaupt ist und macht. Und natürlich diese EU-Strategie Fighting Homelessness, aber ehrlich gesagt, wie bei allen Strategien, die Frage ist, wer macht, ja, und das natürlich kommunizierende Gefäße sind Obdachlosigkeit, geförderter, also sozialer Wohnbau, leistbarer Wohnbau.
Which is good. That's always good to see.
Schwierig ist, wo es nicht einmal das ist, ja, so wie hier.
So you finish that has been so many different spaces.
Ich dauert am 6. Juli.
You started, we didn't expect that.
Ich habe nämlich
Step by step. Beginning Karen asked us maybe if you help me 10 times in 2 hours, that's enough.
Nimmst du das noch einmal geschickt?
But then, especially they
Yeah. Okay, because the microphone is also on. I want to welcome everybody here on behalf of the S&D Housing Working Group. I'm happy that we could organize such a high-level exchange in person here, but also online. So I'm quite happy that we have a lot of followers also online with us. So special welcome to the online. I hope communication and technicalities are fine. Maybe we can also close the door. And I'm also happy to welcome the chair of the House Committee, Irene, which is with us, our shadow rapporteur, Ian, and also Alicia and Marco as members of the House Committee. And with what we also realized in preparing this event, that there is a huge interest on the work in the House Committee, but also on your inputs. And therefore, we are happy that we could do it also online. Maybe before introducing also the speakers, maybe share a little bit my thoughts on the topic which we are discussing today. And as radical as it may sound to some people, maybe also to some which are not joining us here, is homes are to be lived in and not to be speculated with. Homes are for the people and not for the profit. And this is, I think, one basic principle in our group. In particular, we have a responsibility also to lead and to push for action in the European Parliament on the issues which we are discussing today, which in general is also to provide at the end affordable housing for everybody. And also we have to push for it because also, as you asked me before, how the committee work is running, we cannot expect any others to do this for us and instead of us. But also that's why I'm confident that we will all learn very important things also from today, a unit for our work in the House Committee. So therefore, having said this, let me introduce our experts. So to my right is Josh Ryan Collins. You're professor on economics and finance at University College of London. and your particularly interest is in the financial system and its role in housing markets and environmental transition. And also you wrote a book, which is why you can't afford a home. Then to my left, we have Tanja Wessely. She's the CEO, the director of Volkshilfe Wien. Volkshilfe translates in English into People's Aid. So it's a non-profit organization working in a lot of social fields, but also working in the fields of housing from taking care from homelessness, providing special houses, and also one of Tanya's projects is on the list for our house mission to Vienna, which is Der Hafen, which is a project also for women and so on. And as Tanja comes from Volkshilfe Wien, also we ask her to represent a little bit the housing perspective from Vienna. So where is a huge and dense system of affordable housing, social housing, and a public housing policy as such. And then to my, between me and Irene, our president, there is Martijn Jeroen van der Linden. You're professor of practice in new finance at The Hague University of Applied Science, and you're researching in the digitalization and geopolitics of money and the integration of environmental and social values into finance. Hard research, probably, as the title also says, and you're working also on the project of water work of money, which you will probably explain also to us. So, having done the introduction, thank you for joining us here. And I would ask you to, maybe in 10 minutes, all the three experts to share a little bit your thoughts with us, each. Each, yes, and then afterwards we could join into Q&A. So indicate either here in the room, or even if there is online questions, please use the tools, and then we try to introduce you. And then final remarks will be held by Gabi Bischoff, our S&D Vice President, which is already on the way. And will be with us. Because she's Vice President in the S&T Group, I have to say also full title for Sustainable Economy, Social Europe and Single Market. So housing is not only housing is in of the topics today, but also this. So then I would say we start with London, with you, Josh, then we go to Vienna, and then we go to The Hague.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and to the S&D Group for having me. So I've got a couple of slides present to you. Just to say, I work within UCI, I work for the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, which is a department run by Mariana Mazzucato, which is very much focused on sort of meeting the challenges, the great challenges facing the world. And one of those, without any doubt, is housing affordability. So if we go to the next slide, please. I've tried to summarize the drivers of the financialization of housing in one slide, which is probably impossible, to be honest, but I've had a go here. Hopefully you can read some of it. I just draw your attention to the central blue circles, because this is really at the core of the problem that we have and have had in high income economies since the late 80s, early 90s, really, where following the liberalization of the financial system, in particular mortgage credit, you had an increase in financial flows going into essentially an inelastic asset, which is residential property. So when I say inelastic, I mean it's quite hard to build new homes fast, even at a rate commensurate, anywhere near commensurate with the pace at which banks can create new money and credit, which is what they do whenever they make a loan. So just to make one thing absolutely clear, when a bank makes a loan, it doesn't take money from somewhere else in the economy and recycle it and intermediate it to somewhere else. It expands its balance sheet, it creates new purchasing power. And the fundamental problem is that new purchasing power, that new money is going in. Well, most mortgage loans anyway support the purchase of existing homes. They don't support the creation of new homes. So they're supporting the purchase of existing homes. The main result of that is to push up the value of those homes. It's essentially enabling people to compete with more money over the same fixed asset. So inevitably, it's inflation. It's an inflationary dynamic. And so I want to start off by just pushing back a little bit on the dominant framing of the housing affordability crisis, which is dominant in the UK as well as Europe, which is it is essentially a problem of not building enough homes relative to the number of people. That is part of the problem, and certainly in certain parts of certain cities it's a problem, and certainly there is a lack of social housing. But to say that the biggest problem is purely on the supply side is not correct. It's much more, in my view, a demand side problem. Now, those increased flows of credit push up house prices relative to people's incomes and relative to other types of assets that people can invest in. What that does is it makes housing much more desirable as a financial asset, as a long-term investment to both ordinary people and to investors. And so you increase the demand for that property. Banks are very happy to lend more against that increased demand because the collateral, the security which they're lending against, is also increasing in value. So you have this very strong pro-cyclical positive feedback loop. So banks lend more, collateral values go up, there's more demand, and round we go. So the obvious thing for government and policy to do in response to this excessive, what I would call speculative demand for housing as a financial asset, would be to repress it, to reduce those financial flows, to reduce subsidies supporting demand. Unfortunately, they've done completely the opposite since the late 80s. They have, as these green squares show you, in regard to, obviously they liberalized the financial system to try and help people own homes in the 80s and 1990s, made mortgage credit easier. But they also have liberalized the private rental sector, encouraged people to buy second homes and rental homes. They've privatized social housing, sold off social housing, underinvested in social housing. And on the fiscal policy side, there have been repeated and ongoing subsidies for homeowners, and essentially a huge favoritism of one tenure, which is home ownership over the private rental sector and social housing. And also they've made it, there's no real tax in most countries on primary residences. There's no capital gains tax. There's no tax on the economic rent that is generated, the windfall rents that's generated from owning a home. And of course, there are also lots of developer and investor subsidies. Finally, monetary policy has contributed to this problem with the very low interest rates that followed the global financial crisis, making housing relatively more attractive financial asset vis-a-vis the other types of safe assets that most investors are interested in: government bonds, high quality corporate assets. The yield on owning real estate has become proportionately higher as the interest rates have been pushed down by quantitative easing, which is buying up those assets out of the economy and making real estate more attractive. So one could think of two phases of financialization. The first phase, running from the late 80s, a bit earlier in the UK and the US, a bit later in Europe maybe, of mortgage market deregulation and innovation. This chart just shows you, sorry, we can move on one slide. I'm assuming I'm doing it myself. There we go. Housing financialization 1.0. This chart shows, on the left-hand axis, shows the credit stock, so outstanding loans averaged across 14 high-income economies in the blue line. And you can see from the 1990s, the amount of lending relative to GDP shoots up from about 40% in 1990, just about 35%, right up to almost 70% at the by the time we reached the global financial crisis, at the peak of that housing boom. And house prices largely correlating with this increased lending. So this is really important to understand, that banks essentially turned into real estate lenders around about the 1990s. And rather than lending to firms, their primary objective, lending to firms, is shown in the orange there, has now become lending against existing assets, mainly real estate. The second phase of financialization if you call the first phase a kind of debt-driven phase, is what you might call a wealth-driven phase. And this followed the global financial crisis. And post-financial crisis, mortgage lending by banks, vanilla mortgage lending has flattened out, and that's partially to do with tougher regulations, which are welcome. But what we've seen instead with these very low, sorry, next slide, please, with these very low interest rates, is a huge new flow of wealth into property. As I said at the beginning, properties become much more valuable, a much more valued asset relative to corporate bonds or government bonds, with the monetary policy regime pushing down interest rates on those assets. So the left-hand box there just shows you the share of buy-to-let purchases. This is landlords buying second homes in the Netherlands on the left-hand side across the whole country, of both individuals and registered firms. And you can see in every year almost that share is increasing. So we go from, I think that's 3% in early 1990s up to 10% across the whole country for individuals, similar for firms. If you look at the cities, it's much more severe. We can see that for individuals, we go from 5% of all property purchases are landlords, right up to 15%, and for firms we go up to 20%. We have a phenomenon that's probably very strong in the UK, where we introduce some tax policies to make it less attractive to buy second homes. People then incorporate, turn themselves into companies to avoid the tax. I expect that's also happening in European countries. At the same time, we also have this growth of, and the right-hand chart shows corporate buy-to-let across the whole of the Eurozone. This is packages over 5 million. You can see that very rapid growth. So first phase and then a second phase, no let up really in these financial flows. So what do we do about it? For me, the next slide, please. For me, the probably the most sort of immediately important policies probably are in the housing policy and planning space. And I think rent controls are really pressing. Rents have got completely out of control in many European cities. And I think there's a lively debate in the UK and elsewhere about their effectiveness and whether they reduce the supply of private rental sector. I mean, the evidence on this is very mixed. There's been a recent study in Catalonia where they looked at the effects and didn't find any evidence at all of a reduced supply. This is pretty using very sophisticated statistical study, and it reduced prices from quite significantly. I think using different planning use classes to prevent the conversion of primary residence or long-term lets to short-term lets or second homes is a really important policy. That's happening in Wales, near England, in Paris and Berlin. Any new build, I think, should be primarily affordable, genuinely affordable, social rented sector. But I think there's also a real opportunity for converting homes that are sold on the market if municipalities can get right of first refusal. This is something that's happening in Barcelona and Paris and probably other places. That's a way of bringing new supply, affordable supply, onto the market much more quickly than new build, which takes much longer and has a bigger environmental footprint. And I think just restrictions or bans on short-term lets and overseas purchases in particular need to be taken really, really seriously. So these are policies that kind of will just stop this financialization process. They're fairly hard policies. Then you have mortgage regulation. And here, I think, to some extent, it's slightly less pressing in the sense that interest rates are so much higher than they were, that there is less pressure from the standard mortgage market. But I am slightly concerned with loan to value. Sorry, one more slide. I am slightly concerned that one concern with raising, for example, loan to value or loan to income ratios is that it's first-time buyers that tend to get hit hardest by that. So you can actually end up concentrating wealth even more in the hands of wealthier people. So I would be more in favor of higher LTV rates or capital requirements on buy-to-let, on people buying second homes and additional homes. I'm very concerned about the recent discussions around revitalizing EU securitization, because this is a means to enable banks to get loans off their balance sheets, and the history of this in Europe is not good. It was a big part of the global financial crises. I think the covered bond system, it works quite well in Europe. There's no need to threaten that by pushing forward with securitization. I'll talk about this in a bit more detail. I think using monetary policy to support renovation, particularly of social housing, is really important, and other financial innovations to help community land trusts, cooperatives buy land, I think, and get mortgages to buy land is a real challenge. Taxation for me, is, the next slide please, is a really important part of the story. We really need to think how we use tax more to put off speculative investment. So, higher rates of high transaction taxes on investors or additional homes, some sort of land value tax or annual property tax. Economists from the right and the left of the political spectrum are agreed on this point, that property is not properly taxed in high income economies. And this is a chart from the European Commission's very good report in 2022, just showing how small property taxes are relative to taxes on labor and taxes on consumption. This really is the way forward for me generally in terms of fiscal policy. We need to move tax away from labor and onto property and wealth. So I mean, you won't be, I'm sure most of you are in agreement on that one. I just want to talk very quickly, I realize I've run out of time, but very quick on the UK. We've done some experiments with some of these policies. So we introduced a higher transaction tax on additional dwellings in 2016. Went up to 3% more you'd pay if you were buying an additional dwelling if you already owned a home. And then we obviously had the higher interest rates come in 2022 due to the COVID-induced inflation. But what you can see from this chart, which shows the number of transactions for all transactions in the blue, and then all additional home transactions, is these developments made very little difference actually to the total number of people buying second homes, and actually the share of second home purchases has gone up over time, despite this increased tax and despite these increased interest rates. And what you also see there is when we had a holiday on a break on stamp duty, it was mainly people buying second homes that revitalized the housing. So the lesson from this really is you've got to do all of these things really at the same time. This is this positive feedback cycle is very hard to break unless I think you do all of these types of policies at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya.
Proceed. Okay. But thank you again for having me. This is very important for an NGO, especially working in human rights, and here big part in fighting homelessness and fighting for affordable housing, to be here and to speak to you. And I'm going to concentrate, like Andreas already said, a little bit on the model of Vienna, and then tell you about what we do in terms of prevention and tackling and fighting homelessness in the city of Vienna, and why I think it is a really important European issue. You already said a lot. I'm wondering why there's nowhere in the policy demands or, pieces Vienna, because there's so much in there that I would say is typically Vienna. So right now, 2025, 100 years ago, was like the peak of the not only social democratic Red Vienna, but the also historical Red Vienna, since it's a model and not only a policy of one party that we maybe like here, but it's really a model. So what does that mean? Social housing is a cornerstone of affordable living, and that is a cornerstone of the possibility to even participate in society. So affordable housing, affordable housing contributes to affordable living, and that is the one of the basics. How can you participate in society and in democracy? So it's not like I'm telling you, I guess, new things, but I think for us it is very important to emphasize it, because you've already heard the financial part of it, and you will hear more, academics to it, but that is what society is about. So if you struggle every day to afford your living, to not be in the streets, if you struggle every day to, pay the food and the school and the clothes for your family and your children, this is not going to be a stable ground for being a participant in democratic participation, having a good life. Hello. So that is how important social housing is. So when I said Red Vienna, the peak 100 years ago, so this was one of the cornerstones to also tax. Yes, it does sound revolutionary, but the rich, and do put it, like now it's kind of funny, but it's just a model. The people that have the money and can afford it, they pay equally or more in order to have everybody living well, because this is also going to pay off for people that are well off, people that are wealthy. Why am I telling you this? Even though it is important that you repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and not think this is so benign. Who is going to listen to me because I'm just, telling you this? Really important. This is the cornerstone of participation in society and affordable living. Housing is no good to trade. It is supposed to be a human right, because it enables you to have a life where you also can contribute as a citizen, not only for yourself, not only for your family, your kids. You can contribute to society because you have the means and you have the power, and you have you are settled in well enough in order to, be a citizen that can contribute. Why it is also very, very important to Europe, and why does Europe need affordable housing and housing for all, and why is Vienna a really good model? We have in the city of Vienna approximately 60% is of all the housing is social housing and subsidized housing. So that is like more than half of it is subsidized, and also, it is not poor services for poor people. So this is really important too, that you do not, treat people at the end of the food chain differently. You have to have really high value, also not only housing. And then from the Viennese model of, subsidized housing, social housing, taxes for housing. I don't want to repeat it, because lots of the demands that you had in the policy brief, Josh, at the end really are a model in Vienna, or what we already do, and it's not only demands. So what we do as one of the largest NGOs and MPOs for tackling homelessness is we are in many, fields of prevention of homelessness and then caring for homeless. This is why I said no poor services for poor people. So we work as a social work entity, from universal prevention to repeat prevention. Why is that important too? It is it's a holistic approach that we do. We do not only work with and for homeless people, but we also get involved in activism. We also get involved in policy briefs and policy papers. So we, can share that with you. Why is it really important that affordable housing is raised with public awareness, especially for the challenges of low-income households? We see it all over Europe, so I don't think it is a special thing in Austria. I guess it's even a less pressing issues than in many other European countries. We have two really specialized counseling offices One is for people that live in Vienna that have no entrance into the subsidized and social housing in the city of Vienna, but are still supported with housing that they can have. One of those is, like Andy said, for the working group, when you visit Vienna, our Hafen, which is a house especially for women with their children, also refugees, also women evicted from their houses or coming from, safe spaces for women to go on and live with us. What you also need to know everywhere, the most vulnerable groups that suffer also when it comes to housing are children. It is care leavers that are in homes when they enter their own life, when they turn in Austria 18 and start to live their own lives. It's women, it's migrants. So it's always the most vulnerable groups that suffer when you do not have affordable housing and housing for all. We have a special counseling office. I don't think you see that very often for eviction prevention. So we have a specialized social work to work with the city of Vienna and people that we support, that we can even save their homes 24 hours before eviction. So there's already the eviction plan, there's already the ticket from the judge, but we, can work as fast with the city of Vienna in order to save even those homes and those houses. That is very important. It is the basis to a Austrian-wide program by the Social Affairs Ministry called the Living Umbrella, Housing Umbrella, Wohnschirm, and the basis is our eviction prevention. We started it in the times of Corona, very high employless rates. So every time when you have high rates of unemployment, you will also see really, bad problems with homelessness, of course. This is like just basic knowledge, I know. But this is when we started in Austria, the umbrella, the housing umbrella, in order to save the houses for people getting unemployed during the Corona crisis. It has been going on ever since. Yeah, maybe more later. I'll proceed. So we have like all the emergency prevention and repeat prevention. Emergency prevention, of course, we also have homeless shelters. We have day shelters. We have shelters to stay just, night. But it is a really nice also within Volkshilfe Wien umbrella of going from universal prevention to repeat prevention in order to care for not only homeless people, but also people that could get homeless and in policy making. My last wish or demand, because lots was said before, as I told you, is if you have safe places, if you have progressive cities that care for the citizens, and not only the citizens with the right nationality or the right Staatsbürgerschaft. Citizenship. Thank you so much. We are seeing a push effect. We're not seeing a pull effect in social programs of countries and cities. We're seeing a push effect, and I think this is really important for this group too, of countries that push their poor into other countries and into other cities. And then you end up as places that are socially safe for most of the people as the bad guys that pull the poor people all across Europe somewhere. And that, it's a twisted tongue and twisted talk, really. So we really need to talk about the push effect of poor people into those cities and those places and those countries that really care for their citizens, care for their country, and care for Europe. And we do have a global crisis in housing, but we really could do better because we have the models that we only have to take and put them into effect in all the places in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. So, and now Martijn and the waterwork.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the invitation. What I will do in the coming 10 minutes, I will briefly explain what we did in the water workings project. Then I will explain what we are currently working on in the housing project, and I will discuss some policy options. Next slide, please. This is the waterworks of Money. Who has already seen it? Right, one. And then you will know what it is in a couple of minutes. So it is a collaboration. Since 4 years, I collaborate with those two people. Caroline Kingma, she's a cartographer and artist, and Thomas Bolle, who is an investigative journalist. And I am an academic professor. And we start to collaborate on mapping the money system, very financial and fiscal, and its multiple relationships to society. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. And why? So what we think, and I think George also explained already, so kind of systemic view to understand those bigger issues. And we focus on visualizing those mechanisms. So what George already said, so if you want to change it, you should focus on different things at the same time. And to address them all, if you really want to address financialization, for instance. And we take a kind of design approach. So we really look at the structure of the system. And we argue the structure that can be changed through policies. And in a way, so also already mentioned, so when you read the text of economists, of central bankers, or fiscal specialists, it's also always highly difficult language. So most people, they cannot understand important topics as the housing market or as financialization or as money creation. So what we wanted to do with this project is making the world of money and finance more accessible to a broader audience. Next slide, please. And then a little bit how we developed this map. So first, of course, me and Thomas, we are both researchers, so we already know a lot about the literature. That's what we shared in the beginning with Caroline, so she was reading that. And then we were looking for a metaphor. So when you look at this, language is technical, difficult, so we choose very explicitly to describe money as water. It is already used quite often, and we speak about liquidity and wealth can evaporate and all those kind of things. But we use it very explicit. So we argue, so we can close channels, we can open new lines of liquidity. We use we use this terminology. And then Caroline started to make scenarios. So what is really the essence of the system? What should be really on the map? So she made really hundreds of sketches of the total map, but also of all kinds of details. For instance, shadow banking, very complicated, can be visualized in an easy way that more people can understand it. And then, of course, it's also a very big topic. And even if you're a professor, you're only specialist in a specific part of the map. So then we did more than 100 interviews to understand all the different details of the system. And then finally, step 5. So that's Caroline, her brilliance. So she drew for more than 2,000 hours. So she starts in the left bottom, and then she just continues for almost half a year, and then we had the map. Next slide, please. And this is the waterworks of money, presented in 2022. So in the middle, you see the Tower of Society. At the top, the rich people with the huge amounts of water. And the lower you go in the tower, there's a lack of water. And around it are the institutions of the monetary, financial, and fiscal systems. And the fiscal system, the pension funds, economics, education, banking, and in the shadow banking, of course. Here you have financial markets, you have the central banks and the regulators. And here you have the politicians. Next slide, please. On the side. And while Caroline was drawing the map, Thomas and me, we wrote text for animation. So we used the map as the basics and cut the map into pieces. And we collaborated with a studio to explain in 2 times 20 minutes what's happening in the system. We describe what is happening, but we also criticize it. And we also, in our animation, explain what happened last 15 years. Then we had both things, so the map and the animations, and then we exhibited in many places, so at festivals, in museums, at the Ministry of Finance, at Deloitte, at banks in the Netherlands, and in the end also international, for instance, at the Venice Biennale, and the main objective was to make it accessible to a broader audience, and that went quite successful. So more people, also just normal people, can have a look at the map and discuss together, is this fair, is this good? Of course, afterwards, we also wrote plenty of articles, not only for economic journals, but also for journals in architecture, in art, for investigative platforms, training platforms, so really different kind of things. And we organized tens of workshops and what around this topic. And what we argue, so in this map, so we have this tower, and around it institutions, and there you see already the process of financialization. So the financial world is quite big in relation to the tower, and we focus all the time in the workshops and conferences on inequality. So we identified mechanisms in the system that are contributing to inequality. And in the end, of course, then we had all this content from the conference and the workshops, and we analyzed together with the Rabobank and also wrote a piece about it. Next slide, please. And what we did, so this is the Waterworks project, so we focus on the mechanisms in the system contributed to inequality. And there are 7 mentioned, I will only explain one. Unequal access to liquidity, Josh mentioned already. So it's access to new liquidity, to new water in the current system. Next slide. So there is a connection, next slide please. There's a connection between the tower and the banking system. And it's visualized quite clear. The higher you are in the tower, the bigger the lanes or the pipelines to the banking system are. And when you're at the bottom of the tower, you do not have a connection to the banking system, to new liquidity. And that's a problem also in the case of the housing market. So the higher in the tower, the more affordable interest rates you get, and the bigger amounts you can borrow from banks. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we criticize the system. I will not explain this in detail, but we also developed 3 future scenarios to facilitate discussion about possible futures. 2023. Next slide, please. And then we started to work on the housing market. So that started at the end of last year. And in this project, we really mapped the flows of money in the Dutch housing market to understand rising housing price and growing inequality. And we collaborated with the Dutch Ministry of Housing, South Holland, a couple of banks, and kind of and Follow the Money, a journalistic platform. Next slide, please. So again, it is about a systemic analysis. So this is the sketch. Carlijn just started on the final map, on the very detailed map, and we argue. So if you discuss this topic of financialization in the housing market, then you should take into account those kind of topics. So the existing stock of housing in the Netherlands, the funders, the markets, the real estate trajectory, and the fiscal apparatus, and all kind of government instruments, but also what is planned and newly built. Next slide, please. And then if you look at those problems, so it is mentioned, so this inequality, so this unequal access to the housing market, that is in our view the key point. So in the Netherlands nowadays, rent versus buyer, you are 90% more wealthy if you buy as you rent. The statistics of the Dutch Central Bank. So there's really massive inequality. And then Josh mentioned already, so there's this elasticity, so there's almost an unlimited amount of money creation by the banking system. And it's connected to a scarce amount of land, and that leads to massive high housing prices. So that's one thing that should be addressed. The second thing, the social housing problem. So in the Netherlands, we still have social housing, but if you go to the details, then it's more like it's a for-profit driven company. So it's not real social housing anymore. And then if you look at what kind of mortgage loans we have in the Netherlands, so that's all personal based, not object-based, and that means that all the risks for the banks are connected to the persons and not to the things they are funding. And for instance, if you look at climate risk, quite important in the Netherlands, so the climate risks are not there for the banks. They do not have to take them into account because the mortgages are personal, and therefore the banks can ignore them. And the fifth thing is this real estate development trajectory. So that's really long. So in the Netherlands, it takes on average 8 years before a project can start, a new building project. And it has to do with also a very concentrated market, a lack of transparency in this market. So those market processes do not function very well. And finally, this is also discussed already quite often, of course, that we build too little things and too expensive and also the wrong type of houses. So we will continue work on this for the next year. So next year we will have for the beginning of next year we'll have a detailed map and also animations to explain it in more detail. Next slide, please. So in summary, so I think so if you also look from a kind of political perspective, so the housing crisis is essentially an affordability crisis for low and middle income households. So this is really key to understand. So it's about affordability. And there also, when you look at this financialization issue, some argue that financialization in itself is the problem, but you could also argue that it's unequal financialization, that some people really benefit from this process of financialization, most others not. And this is also really key to understand this in developing policies. And then the policy options, there are plenty, but I picked only 5. The first one is also connected to what Jill said, to limit this money creation for the housing market. So this is a kind of unproductive or low productive investment. So most money nowadays, new liquidity goes directly to this low productive activity. So we need more productive activities in Europe. And there have been policies in the past that worked, and maybe we should implement them again. Mm-hmm. And I think so, especially in the Netherlands, so maybe also in other European countries, so treat social housing really as a public utility. So really go back to the foundation as you just explained. So this is really what is needed in the Netherlands. And then if you think so, so there are some questions. So all the time when you talk about taxation and caps, then in the end it's about this discussion. So what is a fair return in the housing market? So we need people to invest in the housing markets, even big developers, because we need more houses in the Netherlands. But what is a fair return? Is it 12% as nowadays, or is it 6 or 9 or 5? But this is really key in developing policies that you have in mind. So what is fair? Because we still need investments. So it cannot be 0 because then there are no investments anymore, but it can also be 12. That's also likely not a solution. And then the fourth is, so consider this object-based loan. So this is really needed if you think about climate risk, because otherwise the climate risks are only there for the people who take the mortgage and not for the banks. So banks will never, or in a very long-term fund making houses climate resistance, as long as if we have those personal-based mortgages. And then in the Netherlands, so this development trajectory, so especially when we look at the land market, so it needs to be much more transparent and more competitive. And in the end, also those very long processes. There it is about simplifying regulation and processes, if it is possible. But it is needed in the Netherlands. We need more houses. And then finally, so we are working on the Netherlands. But it might be very valuable to connect and to do similar studies in other European countries and look, so what are the similarities between those countries, what are the differences, and which solutions are needed on the European level and on the national level. And we are very happy to contribute and to make it visible that more people can understand those different options. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all 3 for your inputs, and as we are many here in the room and many online, I will not make a bad summary of 3 good exposés, but immediately ask if there is any question, remarks, or whatever, opinions, views.
I have questions.
Yeah, please, Irene.
First, on the rent control, because you brought the example of Barcelona in Catalonia. We were there in a mission. We've also discussed it, I think, in a hearing with BISC. So there are actually different opinions on that. And so it is true that prices have gone down. On 6.4% in Barcelona, and I think 3 point something on average on Catalonia. The thing is that is twofold. First of all, the distributional effect of such reduction are not clear as far as I've learned. So someone says that it's more likely that these happen on the top of the distribution. So for high income that saw the very high rents to go down a little bit rather than the low rents go down. And I wanted to ask you about that, if you have evidence or opinions on that. And then also of the impact on supply, I don't know, because we've heard different voices, and so actually it seems that there are numbers on a reduction of contracts, on rental contracts being signed. Then I talked to other people that said no, but that reduction is because the law changed a couple of years ago, making the length of the rentals longer. So it's possible that we see fewer interruption at renewals, and that's why we see fewer contracts. But I don't know if you have any information or data about that. And the second type of question is on transaction tax. So tax on housing transactions, because in overall, in principle, I agree it should be something that helps moderating a little bit the price increases, but that it depends a lot on the type of demand that you are facing. Because if the demand is inelastic or easily substituted, then in that case, what you see actually is the opposite, is that the tax gets transferred very easily to the final price, increasing. And this is what I think is what happened, for example, in Madrid. I lived in Madrid for many years, and in Spain, they introduced this, it was not a transaction tax, but they introduced a tax all of a sudden. It was on a sort of a capital gain that basically if you sold the house that you had bought many years in advance, on the increase in prices, you would have paid, you still pay a huge amount of taxes. And this was supposed to moderate the prices, the selling price, to avoid the speculation, etc., etc. The problem is that the demand in Madrid was increasing and was perfectly substitutable. So I don't know how to say that. So yes, workers and lower income people left Madrid, but you have all these very high people coming from abroad, and they have no problems in paying everything, including the tax instead of the owner. Mm-hmm. So the price of apartments downtown Madrid have tripled in 10 years. But and I don't know what what could substitute for this kind of policy. So I don't have enough creativity, but I was wondering. This is just empirically what I saw in Spain, but I don't know if you have more evidence or papers showing in which conditions this could work.
Shall I take that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the second point around tax, yes, that's exactly why I was emphasising the planning reforms as a more effective immediate policy than tax reforms. There are numerous other examples, just like the one you mentioned in Madrid. I mean, the chart I rushed through rather basically showed that the introduction of the higher rate of transaction tax for second homes didn't make much difference at all. There is, and probably even more interesting is the fact that when interest rates went up, you did actually see a reduction in buy-to-let mortgages. So landlords did start to reduce their second home transactions, but overall purchases of additional homes were maintained because there was a sort of pent-up demand from cash buyers, basically. And as soon as house prices fell a little bit, which was partially due to the interest rate rises, partially due to COVID, they just came in and swallowed up these houses. And that's why you didn't have this fall, even though you had higher interest rates and a higher taxation. So particularly in an economy with globalized capital flows, where overseas investors can also buy, cities like London and Madrid become almost like gold. Real estate in these cities becomes like a hedge against inflation. And these types of buyers are not very sensitive to marginal changes in cost or taxation. So this is why you need planning reforms, why you have to essentially say, in these areas where we have serious affordability problem, high pressure zones, we will reserve these homes, these units for affordable housing for people for need, genuine need, and taxation won't be enough. On the rent point, I'm not an expert on rent controls, and it is a complex area, but there has been some papers that have looked at the sort of broad swathe of history, the use of rent controls. So there's a paper by Sebastian Cole and Holodin. I don't know if you're talking to either of them as part of your committee, but they did find historically a pretty strong correlation between hard rent controls and reduced inequality within the housing system and generally. Actually.
What papers are those?
Yeah, I can send those
Yeah,
to you.
you can send the links or the title to Andres and you can distribute.
Yeah.
Because that would be very much.
Yeah, we
interesting.
will collect all the information, what we have seen and maybe other ones and send it around. You finished with Jan?
Yes, I'm happy for the other panelists.
Mhm.
So we take the other, then we already have Gabi and Marco. So I don't know if, yeah.
I can go after.
Okay, then
Yeah.
maybe then we.
That's good.
I wanted to
Yeah,
respond here
okay.
too, but
Okay, me first. Well, first of all, thank all the experts for this speaking today. I have just one concrete question. I think the issue, maybe we have here a problem that usually we saw this crisis of the housing seen through the lens of the bigger cities and this urban aspect. But this is also the problem if you know that rural areas are also suffering from this. For example, the trace and the selling of the housing stock with the idea of making the fast money while also limiting the existential residential stocks due to this rental capacities is also reality in the rural communities. So based on your works that you have done, I would be keen to hear if anyone has dealt specifically with these areas in relation to the rural housing. Are there any difference in the trend, but also potential solution and responses here?
So maybe we take Gabi as well and then.
Thank you very much and for the presentations and also for highlighting again that there is no sort of golden one solution, but that it depends on the right package between housing policy, for example, mortgaging policies, banking, taxation and speculation. And I was wondering, especially with the financialisation, you said that indeed, if you look at overseas investors, etc., that in these high-risk areas where we can say there is a housing crisis, to stop that. But my question is how to do that. If you can give some more information about how this could be done. Are there good examples already somewhere where this is done that we can take some lessons from?
Okay, who wants to jump in? Maybe Tanya and
Yeah.
then Martin and then.
Just a few statements. I mean, you really have to view, and then you have to get there. I know that, but you really have to view housing as a public service. And you need a rent market that is flexible, is especially important for, as I said before, the vulnerable, so-called vulnerable groups, families, women, children, migrants. And yes, you also have problems in rural areas. It's not so much the rent, but it's of course taking out the loans by the banks and not being able to pay them back because of all the same problems, unemployment, higher energy rates, You also see the problems between the urbanization, higher rents and higher prices in the cities and the surrounding areas, because you have, the people going in and out, just like you said, in terms of Madrid, you do not have normal or just regular people living in your cities anymore. You don't have policemen, you don't have teachers, you don't have caretakers, you don't have, that is really bad. So then you have the commutes and you have the places around the cities that are not only rich, but they are getting poorer as well. Because what you do is, and what, the policy is, you build the satellite cities around the big cities where you commute to work in there. It's only the sleeping cities and it is poor service as well. So this is like, going further and further and further. So this is really important. And one thing I wanted to say, I don't want to, drag it out, but this is really important to view all this like you do here in a European context, because you will not be able to do your own country or city policy if you have the people coming in that are allowed to buy your houses and, put up the rents, not even live there, but just, buy flats or whatever in order to, speculate. You will not be able to control the rents in your city, the housing policy in your country. There has to be a European perspective. It's not possible without it.
Yeah, maybe you had examples of how to stop it in your presentation. Maybe you should just repeat it.
Stop what?
Yeah,
The overseas investment.
stop the overseas investments.
Yeah, so sorry, whose question was that?
Here.
Your question, Gary, sorry. Yeah, so two good examples are Switzerland, which unfortunately is not in the EU, but nevertheless, I think worth looking at. They've had a prohibition on overseas buyers of residential property for a long time, many years, and I think there's evidence it's been quite effective. Australia is a more recent example where they've introduced restrictions on overseas buyers buying residential property. So that's another one I think that would be worth looking at. I'm not quite sure what the EU law implications of this sort of thing be in terms of capital. It is a form of capital restriction over global capital restrictions. So that would need to be investigated. Shall I take I'll just comment briefly on the rural areas question. I've looked a little bit at areas in the UK where there's a lot of tourism. So Wales, for example, very rural areas, but very beautiful areas, very popular with Londoners and people living in the southeast buying second homes in those areas, pushing up pricing and actually making it very difficult for local people to afford to live, because obviously it's just taking a property off the market that's not lived in most of the year round. So it's going to put pressure on rents. It's going to put pressure on make it more difficult to buy a home. And in Wales, actually, they've introduced these sorts of planning restrictions. So they've introduced 100% tax, a council tax, which is the local service tax on second homes. They've even prohibited people from outside the area buying homes, I believe, in certain areas. So they are taking and prohibited short-term lets. So they are taking steps to address that. And again, I do think this is the best way forward. Politically, it may be easier, these types of policies, than to change the tax system or regulate mortgage credit. Yeah. Don't know if I missed. I don't know, Martin.
Yeah, maybe one other comment. So in the Netherlands, we found out in the research for the Waterworks project, so the Dutch pension funds, after the financial crisis with this low interest rate environment, they had to make still a return of 7%. They first moved more to equity, but that was not also not enough. And then they started to invest also increasingly via other funds, hedge funds, American, UK hedge funds, and they also bought quite some houses in the Netherlands, in the cities, to make this return of 7%. And this is also with the pension funds, that they simply do not consider housing as a public utility. So it is in The Hague really the case that you can live there as a lecturer, you pay your pension fund, they give your money to the hedge fund. Really. Hey, but this is really what is happening on a large scale. And we had these discussions with those board pension funds, and they could not explain it themselves. So if you want a return of 7%, and the wage of a lecturer increase every year with 3%, how is that possible? That's simply impossible. But this is the kind of logic what is also in the pension fund system, at least in the Netherlands. So from a public policy perspective, that's really strange. So there is definitely one thing that could be done, that they are not invested doing that anymore. That would already be very helpful. And so thinking through those, yes, those how the money flows, that's really important to understand financialization. So who's investing where? And there are often public institutions who are also giving money to private funds that invest in those kind of practices.
So maybe pensions should be also understood as public commodity more than. But maybe this is the next specialized
Yeah,
committee we
I
have to
think-
work on.
Yeah, public service.
I think we have enough on our plate.
Yeah. I think
No, I was just now going specifically on the financialization. So which are the players that you think have the biggest role or have had the biggest role? Now you mentioned pension funds, for example. Before coming here, I met with a local administrator in Italy that said, we don't have enough funds to build social housing projects. We need to do PPP, public-private partnerships. And we need to involve certain kinds of actors. And he said, and maybe pension funds could help because they are patient capital and they can afford to invest money in projects that maybe they can get 4% per year compared to, I don't know, Blackstone or whatever, I don't know, other kind of, or other investors. So this is the first question. How do you see that? Maybe it also depends on the country, on the system. So maybe pension funds in certain countries are more aggressive and seek higher returns. In other countries that might be less so. I mean, and it could with the proper regulation direct it to certain types of projects, not all, obviously not public housing which has zero return, but a certain type of social housing could be. And the other thing I was wondering, what's the role of other players, like I don't know, rights, I don't know how you pronounce it, real estate investment trust versus other types of projects. And also here, there could be a role for taxation policies. In many countries, they are not taxed. Sometimes it's taxed the capital gain, but it's not taxed the corporate profit. Do you see these as something that fueled the problem? And another thing, then the last thing, I was talking to some of these, I don't know, financial players, and what they do, they create a special purpose vehicle company, a temporary company dedicated only to a real estate project. So they get capital based on that project. Of course, those who put the capital, they will need to see their return. So they need to be paid, to find their payoff. Then this company doesn't do anything. So the project is done by a company of an architectural company. Of course, the architectural company needs to make a profit out of it and will charge for the project. Then they will do the bid and find the construction company. And the construction company, of course, they have to maximize their profit out of it. And then, of course, all these houses that have been built, they need to be distributed and sold. And there is another company, which is a distribution company. And then it's so and so and so, which is something that basically makes a long supply chain of actors. Each one of them has to maximize their profit. 40 years ago, when my parents bought their home, they went to the constructor and say, I know you are constructing a house, and they bought the house. No intermediaries in the middle. So only one that had to maximize the profit. And here you have 5, 6 corporates that have to maximize the profit. So is this something that you've seen? Is this something we can correct in somehow? Or I don't know. I was just wondering if you've done any research.
You just explained it, how your parents did it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's speculation, and it's making money off
Yeah, but-
a public service. So that's what's wrong.
Yeah, but it's go to undo that now. So how can we?
I maybe
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
also come in on this
Mm.
because I've 2 or 3 points. The one is there is the demand. There's a mismatch of demand and supply. So we have a higher demand than a supply, but as you mentioned, it's inelastic. Therefore, it's not easy to let's say build houses quite quickly because we have a limit of space and it takes time and so on. But then the question is also how to increase the supply. So how to build more houses, but it's not the only question, because if we build more houses, the question is also on what basis or what kind of houses or apartments are built. And I think this is the first thing: is if you leave it only to the market, you put in also the screws. So you have to have at least a minimum percentage of controlled, affordable, social, whatever you call it, houses. The second point I wanted to make is I recently spoke to a big Central European insurance company, and they say their problem is usually they want to support also constructing projects and build houses and then rent to a normal market price, because for them it's important to have the stock to cover the risk. So they don't want to be an investor. They are not a pension fund. They are simply a household insurance, health insurance, and this kind of stuff. And of course, for them, it's extremely hard, because in every board, the investor asks them, listen, but on the market, there are higher interest rates. So why? So the question is, where has this gone? Also, because in the past, let's say 50, 70, 80 years ago, it was good if you were owning a house and renting 10 apartments. You don't need an extremely increase. You don't want to have a big return on investment. It was simply good that you own a house and you have a permanent inflow of normal money. So my question is also, the one question is, where do we have in the financial system also rules which are firing this? Bookkeeping rules, balance sheet rules, which, let's say, makes companies even driving into this direction. And the second question is, when we speak to EPP and we say we are looking for rental control, for example, or strong rental laws, so that you cannot increase permanently only with inflation rate or things like this, then they would say the supply will immediately shrink because nobody is interested. Do we really think, or do we have an evidence that this is true? Or might it not be that even, let's say, in a more controlled market, people would still invest?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I'll have a go.
And what role does land policy play?
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
It's always very important.
Do you want to answer now, or should we take the online question? It's already enough. Huh?
You decide.
I decide. Okay, we take the online. Also,
We'll take more questions.
otherwise, we have a wrong incentive, so we allow people online. Also.
Absolutely.
Well, we have only one, but so which one? Barbara Steenbergen. So we
Yes.
have some idea what is the question
Yes.
already.
Do you hear me?
Barbara.
Do you hear
Yes.
me? I'm connected from Berlin. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference. Berlin or
Perfect. Thank you. Hello, Andy, Gabi. Hello, everybody. Irene. Greetings from very hot Berlin. I think it's the same in Brussels. I wanted to answer some questions that have been here on the table. First of all, the question on rent control. Does rent control really diminish the supply of rental housing? The colleague, I think, from the university in UK mentioned the study of Konstantin Kolodilin from the Deutsches Institut für Wirtschaftsforschung, which gives really a very diverse picture of it. It is really depending what kind of rent control, when you put it in, for how long, and in. But this study has also one clear result, and I'm speaking for the International Union of Tenants, so believe me, we checked that very well. If you put in rent controls, the direct effect is that the rent gets lower for many, many people. The second direct effect is that it prevents effectively social segregation. It's the most, let's say, effectful thing that you can do to prevent that, ghettoization. And last but not least, rent control is the best measure to prevent evictions and renovictions. So I think speaking here to the Socialists and Democrats, this gives, I think, quite a lot of evidence that rent control is a targeted measure, but you have to really tailor-made it to the market situation, and this market situation is differing per country. So this on rent control, please read the study of Konstantin Kolodilin. The second question about what is it all with this financialization of the market and which effects are there currently? I give you, I think, one striking figure. In stock listed companies providing housing, or those who bought the social and affordable housing which has been available on the market, there is one benchmark from €1 of rent that they get from the tenants. 41 cents are directly paid to the shareholders. So income, €1 of rent, 41% is directly given to the shareholders. This has the immediate effect that this money cannot be used for the maintenance of the housing or even new construction or renovation. So this is a direct and massive effect, and this is what we also see. Social and affordable housing that has been privatized to stock-listed companies is deteriorating immediately because they first have to pay. So these as, I think, quite some stuff for thoughts for your debate, I hope.
Thank you, Barbara. And do we have somebody else online? If not, I would say, because it's 10 minutes, so we ask the speakers to answer, and then we ask Gabi for a try of summary.
Final words.
Josh.
Yeah, thanks. So I think just to go to Irina's question about the kind of institutions, what's gone wrong with the financial institutions, I think it is an intermediary problem, which you rightly identified. We seem to have the wrong sorts of intermediaries. We have too many intermediaries between the outcome, which is decent affordable housing, and the money that is there. We all know it's there to invest. So there are some examples where it works. So Singapore is a great example of a socialized pension system where everyone in the country has to put a quite big chunk, if not all of their pension, into a social housing, into a housing fund that then provides mortgages, affordable mortgages for everyone in the country. And of course, the thing about Singapore is the government owns 90% of the land and is able to essentially control the land market and the housing market. Even having said that, they have had serious house price appreciation in the last sort of 10 years. Nevertheless, as a model, I would really recommend looking at that model. Another example is the Livret A model in France, which is a Livret A, which is again a system where a portion of your pension goes into supporting social affordable housing, again, which is administered nationally. And there are many other examples of these funds which are publicly owned almost always and focused on affordable housing, support housing associations or not-for-profit organizations to buy land at affordable rates and build affordable housing, and have found a way of attracting in patient capital institutional investment. I do think it's possible, but clearly models like the Blackstone model, where you essentially have an asset manager whose business model is to go in, buy a load of stock just after a crash when prices are low, ramp up the rents, fill the rent gap, and then sell the whole stock 6 or 7 years afterwards. And Brett Christophers has a wonderful book explaining, the business models that these firms use. That model is completely impossible to use to actually generate social housing. So I do think we can make progress there. And fully agree with the comments from Berlin about rent controls. I mean, let's just, when people say to you, if we have rent controls, we'll have less supply, what does that actually mean? Does it mean we'll have less supply of homes, physical homes?
No,
the homes aren't disappearing, right? So some landlords will sell their homes. That will help meet demand potentially from homeowners. That will mean there's less demand in the So some of these claims are quite problematic. Of course, it does depend a lot on the type of rent control you use, whether it's temporary. But I think the idea of aligning rents with median incomes in the area of the city where people are located has to be looked at much more seriously. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe two remarks. So first, you more or less describe the process of financialization. So more financial intermediaries, more financial transactions, more debts. So this in itself, that's financialization. And I would argue, so the second point, so when you look at the European Union, then really addressing banking is really key. So banks are very dominant, and also in this process of financialization. So the example I just gave of the pension fund who gives money to a hedge fund, the hedge fund has 10 billion pension fund money, goes to banks, gets a cheap loan, and goes to invest. And this is how you can make those returns of 12 or 40%. So this is only possible because there's high leverage in the system, and that's what the banking system is doing. And we have seen a shift since the 1980s from productive investments to low or unproductive investments. And that's just new money water flow directly into real estate or in other financial intermediaries investing in real estate. So this is happening on a large scale. So as long as if that channel is so open and it's not at least partly being closed, then it will be very tough to address financialization housing.
Are we heading to a next bubble?
Crisis.
Yeah, quite like
but there also, so you increasingly see that central banks, we didn't address that at that point, but that central banks are also acting as a backstop of the system, but also financialization. So so without this backstop of the central bank, you would have had an implosion. But they likely in the next crisis they will intervene again to keep the system going.
Yeah, I don't think. Well, I don't think with interest rates where they are, you're going to have big bubbles. If interest rates fall, then yeah, it's on, game on.
Still a quick.
I have a question, sorry, to jump in so late.
Because we were, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Joanna Blood from Danza, and I was wondering about both your presentations. You basically talk about how to fight this by making housing as unattractive as an asset as possible, so making it unattractive to be invested in. I think it was a core message in what you talked about, but then I also see that the urban growth and economic growth is much based on valuation of housing as an asset and ramping up its value and maintaining its value. So how do you think this, and also lots of stakeholders interested in keeping up housing values high. So how do you address this basic contradiction?
I'll just quickly take that one. Yeah, I mean, we certainly can't afford to have a house price crash. That would be disastrous. It would create a massive financial crisis because the banking system is so locked into it. But what we can do, I think, is put into place policies that enable a gentle sort of relative fall in house prices relative to income. So keep incomes growing. If you just flatten house prices without big falls, you can increase affordability without resulting in financial instability. On your broader question, you're right that certainly the Anglo-Saxon economies have become very dependent on ever increasing house prices. You know, mortgage equity withdrawal is a big part of consumption, supports consumption. But in Europe, you have very different models. The German model is not a model that's dependent on ever increasing house prices. It's a model that's much more export oriented, and the SME sector plays a much bigger role. So I don't think it's fair to say most European EU countries have got locked into that sort of model.
Yeah, I'll just make it short to address you as policymakers. We need a European model. That is very important. And it should be housing and affordable housing and housing for all, it should be a public service. This is what I ask of you. It has to do with land policy. It has to do with affordable living for women and their families and migrant people and workers, everybody who keeps our society running. So this is where you have to put your effort into. Thank you.
So then Thank you for your inputs and the discussion. And now our Vice President Gabi Bischoff tries to show us the path out of all the problems.
Yes.
I'm trying to sum up a bit, really from the perspective of what inspiration did we draw from your presentations and from the debate, because we have to focus on very concrete proposals what to do. And I will start off with a reminder, and I listened carefully, is one thing, at least I took again with me from here, is this development on the housing market goes in the wrong, or went in the wrong direction since a long time, latest the 1980s. And we have to keep this in mind if we address solutions. We will not be able in a short time to address this. So we can look at areas where we can have an impact, a bigger impact, so to have more affordable housing. I think the question also on land policy should be something, we haven't discussed it yet, but we should take it also for the future. I think on financialization and speculation, I'm very grateful for your presentation, because it is something that everyone feels, but no one understands how it's really working. So the visualization is quite important. I was asking myself if you shouldn't do a cartoon about it. People can understand and watch, I don't know, short, but these flows of capital. And where do they go? And what impact did they have on the market? So if we want to address this, we really have to think about where to start. And I think this question, for example, we started already to discuss, to say, okay, we have criteria in what defines a housing crisis. And if we take this also to see, okay, one element could be this question of addressing the topic of pension funds and these drivers for financialization. And also, I think it helps always to have good examples, that it works somewhere and it has an effect, a positive one. I think would be helpful also for us in connection to the debate we have about short-term rentals. And I think something I learned again when we were in Lisbon is that we have even more than holiday flats, maybe the problem of empty houses that are just of speculation, or some overseas people that want to have some land in their country but don't use it. And I think the example of Switzerland, that we look a bit deeper also in these examples to see, especially for areas that are defined as cities or areas with a housing crisis. And I thought we had regulation in Europe on that, because if you remember, in the enlargement process, we prohibited for 7 years that people from Western Europe could buy houses in Poland and other countries, because it was very clear that otherwise the Polish wouldn't have, and this is what they negotiated, and other countries for this got certain other longer times for labor movement. That was a deal, and it was done, and it was possible. I think also we have to rethink and see what is possible here, what was done, to make sure that we can address this. But also on the housing policies, I think also the mentioning of the study, we will look into it here, to have a good proposal package on housing policy, on how to stop financialization and speculation. I think with Irene, as former chair of Econ, we have to look deeper into banking regulation again, and where are areas where we, with some changes, could have a bigger effect here on this, and also to see that that we also focus where we can have a big effect or a bigger effect, because otherwise, I mean, we see for how long this was built up. So that that we can do affordable housing. And the last point also from your presentations, that if you want to have affordable housing in a short time, don't focus just on new buildings, but on conversions here and what you can achieve there, and also of new innovative models, be it like in Vienna, or I'm coming from Berlin, where we have also groups of people that wouldn't be able to buy a flat individually, and they pool their resources together. We call it housing group. Yeah, housing groups, and different ways to make it possible for people also to find affordable homes. So I think we got a lot of inspirations from your presentations. We will get also some follow-up from Andreas, and got also some questions we look into. And I thought I had a creative idea in the meantime. I thought we could ask our internal house research project, the EPRS, to look into the effect of pension funds into the housing and do an overview on current studies and data that already exist. In this, they are quite good and they can deliver quite fast, because I think this is also something that can work. And this is why I will close again with the slogan, and that was repeated by all of you, that we want to have housing and houses for the people that keep the city or the region running. Full stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabi. And before you run away, we definitely new house, so we thought thank you. Oh, wait. For the speakers.
Neuhaus.
Yeah.
Need a photo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Study on institutional investors done by the ECB, they show a positive effect on that. But on the prices, housing prices. I think